This is an illustration of her skull. She has a very large, deep fracture to the frontal bone of the skull. She has complex fractures of her nasal bones here, and you have fractures in the upper parts of the orbits. As you can see here, next to the clump of fat, that there's a ovoid area of fracture on both sides at the top of both eye sockets where the bones have basically been blown up against the brain. This illustration shows the clump of fat as it's been pushed up into the brain. This term pneumocephalus refers to air that's actually been forced up into the brain cavity. Here we have probably the most concerning film. If this tan-colored material is normal brain, this pink material represents contusion of the brain or brain damage. Symptoms that can be related to frontal lobe injury include forgetfulness, word-finding difficulty, emotional lability, irritability, sleeplessness, fatigue, and higher levels of anxiety and depression. This particular illustration looks at the floor of the cranium or skull. Underneath these areas here are the eye sockets, and the area of brain that was contused lies above these fractures. And as you can see here in the CT scan and in the illustration, that the force of the blow to her forehead fractured the outer table or the frontal part of the skull, but was transmitted all the way through the skull and fractured the inner table. So you can see that the force was transmitted all the way through the skull, both from the frontal bone striking the brain, but also from below with these orbital fractures from where pressure developed in her eye sockets. Here we are moving on to some of her other injuries. Again, a very complex fracture involving the humerus or the shoulder bone of the arm. And this is a rather large traumatic rotator cuff tear, which would affect her ability to lift her arm away from her body. This fracture required surgical repair with a great deal of hardware and screw placement, which is still present within her body. Here we have a depiction of her fibula fracture. This is a Weber type A fracture of the distal fibula, which is an ankle bone. There's no doubt in my mind that the brain injury is the most serious problem that she has at this point in time, and that these modalities are indicated and would improve the quality of her life.